Okay. Couple here today. If this is fine, we can have a one-on-one session. If you have questions today, it'll be easier to address them. So as you see here, I am in the Lama room. I'm sorry, the light is not so good because I'm facing the window. I turn the lights on in front of me, that doesn't seem to work. It doesn't make much difference. Because as you heard the drilling yesterday, it's much closer to my room today, so it's quite loud. There's a power outage at the moment, so there's no drilling, but when the power comes back on, we'll be drilling again. So I'm hoping this is our Lama room in our house, and it has no windows leading into the courtyard. So hopefully it won't be as loud, but let's see. But as I just was saying, that also the internet here is not as good because it's sealed. So if I go off at some point, if that's what happens, we'll have to figure out a different solution. But for now, let's try this. So as you saw, His Holiness this morning, he ended up starting with the text after all. And actually finished about half the text and said quite a lot more this morning than he'd said yesterday. So I'll start by going through what he said, and then with any extra time maybe go over the text a bit and have questions. Just to review, His Holiness said, I'm talking about Korea, and said that the political problem in Korea, but in terms of religion, people have single-pointed faith. He was very impressed by that. To have unswerving faith in Buddhism under such a political problem there is, I said, I thank you for that. So he said, to have peace of mind, that is your responsibility, because that's the best way to stop nuclear war, is to pacify your own mind. He said it's not just enough to pray for that. You have to establish peace of mind through the Buddhist teachings. And that will benefit not just you, but also society as a whole. Because he admires the Koreans' fortitude. So he was saying, His Holiness was saying, of course, there are going to be many problems in the world at the moment, but that's just the way of things, not something unusual, it's just the way things go. He said things are changing, the times are changing very quickly. But personally, we can have peace of mind and happiness. And as a result, he said you'll live longer, you'll be healthier. As many doctors say, that happiness comes not from external conditions, but from the mind. Or I think, many doctors say he was verifying that you live longer through being happy. And then His Holiness was saying that happiness comes not from external conditions, but from the mind. And mentioning that anger and jealousy, other negative emotions, they disturb the mind. So peace in the world comes from peace in the mind, not through physical force. And he was mentioning about the situation in Russia, saying that this is all the result of the lack of peace of mind. So anger, jealousy, hypocrisy, and then that leads to war. So he said that he prays that from the practice, we can all have a kind of peace of mind. I think he said Shem Shinjang, which would be like appliances, which is something that comes through mental concentration. So His Holiness said, yeah, if we can give an introduction to Buddhism, and it's good if we can all meditate. So as a preliminary, we can have, in order to establish analytical meditation, he said for the preliminary, we can have placement meditation, focus the mind. So then he said, it's hard if you're hungry, so have tea first. But it was interesting this morning, His Holiness kept saying we're going to meditate, and then he kept talking. So I wasn't sure. I was concerned because I didn't want to miss anything he said, because I was trying to write it all down. But sometimes he'd say to meditate, and then I wasn't paying attention to what he was saying, because I wasn't thinking he was going to talk again. So I may have missed a few points there. So His Holiness quoted a verse on the sevenfold Parorchana posture. Some of you might know this. So often in the West, this is called the lotus posture. A lot of people refer to it that way. So just to make it clear, In the Tibetan tradition or in the Buddhist tradition, really, this is called the Vajra posture. It's called the lotus posture, Padmasana, in the Hindu tradition, which is, I think, why that has become the common term in the West. But actually, in Buddhist tradition, if you have the male and female deity in union, then the male deity is in the Vajra posture, the female deity is in lotus posture. It's a different posture. So it's also, but it's sometimes referred to as the sevenfold posture of Vairocana. The deity Vairocana is said to be sitting in this posture. So His Holiness quoted a verse, which I believe is this verse by Goa Ansapa. So I have a little translation of that. It's useful if you want to remember it, because it's in verse. So it's like this. The legs, the hands, the hips, that's 3. Teeth, lips, and tongue together make 4. Head, shoulders, eyes, and breath, 4 more. 8 points of Vairocana, these. So actually, there's 8 points, but sometimes it's condensed to 7. So that's why it says 7 points of Vairocana. But this verse quotes it as 8. So as you see, it's a little confusing because it says the legs, the hands, the hips, that's 3. Teeth, lips, and tongue together make 4. So the teeth, lips, and tongue, that actually is 1 together. So that makes 4 plus the previous 3. And then head, shoulders, eyes, and breath, 4 more. So that's 8. 8 points of Vairocana these. So the legs ideally are folded across, that each foot is on top of the opposite thigh. So that's what we often refer to as the lotus posture. Here is the Vajra posture. So that is rather hard to do for most people unless you train in it. But if you can't do that, it's at least the most important thing is that the back is straight. So if you can't sit in lotus posture, you half lotus is next best. If not, just folded legs. And if not, instead you can sit in a chair as long as you're sitting up straight and not hunched back in a chair leaning back. And then the hands, of course, folded. So one palm above the other, and then the thumbs touching. And then that will be folded, of course, at the lap. I can't show you that here. And then the hips are straight. So also with the hips, I translated that it is hips here, but it's not entirely clear if it's saying hips or backbone. But in any case, it's that one should be sitting up straight, in the same meaning. Then teeth, lips, and tongue. So that's 1. So teeth, it said not clenched too tight, and not that your mouth is just hanging open, but just that the teeth should be on the tip of the on the lips, the front teeth, just slightly touching the lips, and then the lips should be even. Again, not the mouth wide open, but not clenched tight either, just slightly open. And then the tongue. So the tongue should be then pressed on the palate. And then head, shoulders, eyes, and breath. So the head should be straight, but eye slightly downcast, and the shoulders even. Eyes, again, the eyes slightly looking down, either towards the tip of the nose, but can be to a space in front. And it's also encouraged not to close the eyes completely, have slightly open, so there's some light is allowed in. And then the breath, of course, that the breathing is even. So again, these are 8 points. But of the keeping the teeth and lips even and pressing the tongue against the roof of the mouth can be combined, it says. So that would make 7. So, oh yeah, that makes 7, but then the breath, this is the point. Then the breath is not actually, if we could include only 7, that's not including the breath. So now we see the drilling has started again. Is it very loud there? If it doesn't bother you, it's perfectly fine here. A bit loud for me, but as long as you're okay. If there's a problem, let me know. Okay, good. So yes, so the last one, the breath, that's not, if we have the 7-point posture, then it's only 7, and the 8-point includes the breath. So the breath in this regard actually means counting the breath. This is according to Gao and Sapa. The Gao and Sapa was the Gao and Sapa was it Dunya Drupa, I believe is the name. So he was a Gelug practitioner in the 15th century, I believe, 16th century. Yeah, 16th century, that's right. And he was posthumously recognized as the third Panchen Lama. During his lifetime, he wasn't recognized as such, but then his incarnation, Panchen Losang Trik Gyaltsen, was in the first one to be named the Panchen Lama. So the point here is this is the ideal way to sit for meditative concentration. And it's good to train to be able to sit that way, but at the same time, we have to do what is reasonable for us and not feel that you have to fit exactly what is in the textbook. But this is encouraged because it all has to do with the subtle winds of the body, which enhances the concentration, especially the back being straight and the winds flow properly, and also the way that the mouth is held, and all of these things are meant to allow for easier concentration. Of course, the main thing in meditation is what's happening in your mind, but the position of the body can facilitate that. So then His Holiness was saying, we use reason and not just faith. So he says he has respects for all religious faiths, but when we talk about Indian religions, he was saying the Buddhism and Hinduism, and of course he didn't mention, but the other major religions of India would be Jainism and Sikhism. I suppose those are the main, I think, the 4 religions that have been founded in India, that are still existent anyway. So he's saying that all of these have a meditative tradition. It's something that's quite strong in India, that is not as much developed in other places, and they have the tradition of getting a steady mind that's not stirred by afflictions. It's interesting to see that. A few years ago, His Holiness gave a talk at a university in Bangalore. There were quite a few thousand students there, and one of the students asked about how to deal with depression, and His Holiness said, "Well, you Indians, you have your own tradition of shamatha and vipassana." And you could see that the student, when he heard that, it's like he lit up, because these words, they resonate with them. It's like in the West when people talk about something that we think of this as our ancient tradition, something that we identify with. So he's just sort of reminding him that you can use that. You don't have to feel that you have to use Western psychology or modern methods. That you Indians have your own tradition that's proven to be effective. So he's saying that we think about how all beings, like me, they want happiness and not suffering, but they are countless, and I am just one. So he's saying that the main thing for peace of mind is to rely on the proper antidote. So this is, for each individual affliction, we have to rely on the antidote. So there are we call specific antidotes, and then general antidotes. So each specific antidote is, for example, if there's a lot of attachment, then we meditate on the ugliness of the object. This is the counter attachment. We meditate on essentially, if we have, because attachment comes from exaggerating the good qualities of something. So we start to think about the bad qualities of that particular thing that can counterbalance the attachment. And then the specific antidote to anger would be to meditate on love. Meditate on, we're angry at somebody, to think about reasons why we should have affection for them and compassion for their suffering. But then the general and more powerful antidote would be to meditate on emptiness. These other ones only are temporary, but meditation on emptiness can uproot the afflictions. And that was not just any particular one, because all of them are grounded in the view of self. So by uprooting that one, then the other ones will gradually pacify. But because it's very hard to get to that point, in the meantime, use the other antidotes also. So His Holiness was saying that other schools, other religions, talk about a self that is substantially separate from the aggregates. There's some kind of soul that exists differently from the body and mind that has independence of that. So through reason, we can negate that in Buddhist philosophy. So His Holiness was asking, well, whose body is this? Is it mine? If it's my body, then where am I? Am I the possessor of my body? He said, when we can't find, when we search for it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So search from head to toe, but we don't find the self anywhere in the body. So His Holiness was saying, think about. So then he was talking about what we call senji namji. This is in Buddhist philosophy. There's also a question. I think I was mentioning this yesterday about what is the self. If we negate the self, does that mean there's no self at all? And conventionally, we do say that there's a self, but what does it mean to be the conventional self? And so there's a question in Buddhist philosophy because there has to be something that goes from life to life if we accept reincarnation. And so there has to be something that carries karma, somebody that creates karma and experiences the results. And so many Buddhist schools, and exemplified by the scholar Bhavaviveka, who I mentioned yesterday, a Madhyamaka scholar, claim that the mental consciousness is actually the conventional self. So that is the real self, or not the one that's conventionally existent, the one that actually is findable and can be pinpointed as what is the creator of karma and the experience of karma. However, in the Prasangika reasoning, that is negated. He said that even this idea that the mental consciousness is a self is still a very subtle kind of self-grasping. It's not recognizing the true intent of the Buddha's teaching, that there is nothing findable as a self. So His Holiness was saying, even if you might think that the body is not me, but the mind is, but this also can lead us into traps. So he said, when we analyze, we should find that there's nothing that we can point to and say, this is it. But at the same time, when we don't analyze, when it's just normal experience, then there is something that is just merely renowned by terminology. So this is the conventional self, according to the Prasangika. So His Holiness also said, well, what about the Buddha? So we can analyze the Buddha. The Buddha might seem to be more real because he's such an enlightened being. But when we talk about the body qualities of the body and mind of the Buddha, apart from there, where's the Buddha? We can't find the Buddha, or even the very highly realized bodhisattvas. He said you can't really find them when you look at them upon their basis of designation. So there's nothing found, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because there is still harm and benefit. So that's easy to understand. It's all well and good to say I don't exist, but if somebody harms me, I'm probably going to react somehow. And if I might still be looking for things that I like. So it shows that conventionally that still functions. So it's merely, he said, thinking about it as existing and merely by the power of name, this he finds to be a very forceful kind of meditation. So he said in the Madhyamaka text, then mere imputation by conceptual thought, this is very clearly laid out. So then that things exist, Mingkyang Dakyu. So Mingkyang means only in name, and then Dayu means exist in imputation. So these are sort of two sides of the same thing, but one of them is the negation, of saying mere name. So it doesn't exist beyond the name, but at the same time, it does exist as an imputation. It doesn't not exist at all. So he said this is something very clear that we should understand. So then His Holiness, as he often does, he quoted these verses from the Madhyamaka Vatara by Chandrakirti. So if you want to find these, I believe it's verses chapter 6, and then verses 35 to 39. So 35 to 38 are the ones he usually quotes. So I think it's actually 34 to 36. This is correct. 34 to 36 are the ones he usually quotes. And then 37, 38, he also added today. So you may have heard before, 36. So this is, if all things, yeah, so things depended upon inherent existence. So the point here, what's being said is that if things existed inherently, but at the same time, when somebody has a direct realization of emptiness, they negate the inherent existence of things, then that would be the case that the realization of emptiness actually acts as the catalyst to destroy something. But that's not the case. So they must have not existed inherently from the beginning. It's not the case that things were first inherently existent and then they were discovered, then that inherent existence was destroyed. And then the next verse, which is the most important of the three, that so that is saying, because when you analyze things, apart from emptiness, back on this side, you don't find anything. Therefore, do not engage in analysis on conventions of this world. So what this means is that things, when we analyze to find something, all we find is emptiness. So we're saying back here on this side, meaning on the side of conventions, we don't locate anything. And so this means that this is actually implicitly a critique of Bhavaviveka's views, who I mentioned before. So Bhavaviveka has the idea that what he considers there's two different kinds of analysis. There's analysis of the conventional and analysis of the ultimate. So when we analyze conventions, we do find something. So if we ask what is the self, we do find conventionally that it is this the mental consciousness. But ultimately, that doesn't work. That things don't exist ultimately. But Chandrakirti says that what you call conventional analysis is really a form of ultimate analysis, and so you're using ultimate analysis and then thinking that you use ultimate analysis to find something. So you're mixing conventional and ultimate truth. What you're finding is really an object of negation. It's not the real thing. So this might sound a little confusing, but practically what it's saying is that at the level of appearances, things function. It's like I was talking about yesterday. We can talk about the country of India, and then we can talk about the country of China and two different countries, and have a very coherent conversation about them. And within the context of that, certain statements are right and certain statements are wrong. If I say India has a larger population than China, and you say the opposite, it's simply the case that one of us is right and one of us is wrong. There's not room for ambiguity, really, as long as if there really is a measure of the population. It's not a matter of opinion. At the same time, it's purely a mental construct. There is no such thing as the country of China. It depends on how we decide where the boundaries are, and then just label how many people are within that. So there really, within our conventional speech, there is right and wrong, but it's not something that's established on the side of the own object. It depends upon how we label it. The example that's often given, which is similar here, is the example of two men in a temple who are arguing over a statue or a painting, I believe, a painting on the wall of the temple. And one man says this is Vishnu, and one says it's Shiva. And they argue and argue and argue about it. And finally, the temple caretaker comes over and says, "What are you arguing about? That's not the Vishnu nor Shiva. That's a painting." So, in this regard, the person who says this, the caretaker, he's correct that it's not really Vishnu or Shiva, but that's out of context of the conversation. And within the context of the conversation, actually one of them is right and one of them is wrong. But that truth is not an ultimate truth. It depends upon convention. So what Chandrakirti is saying is that do not bring ultimate analysis to bear upon ordinary convention, otherwise it will destroy it. So, and the things within the world are understood within the world, but beyond that, they don't have any real existence. It's something that, so if any of you were here for the course I had a few months ago on Grinding to Dust, I had a little picture that I thought illustrated this very well. I found this on the internet. So it has the word truth, and then there's a magnifying glass looking at the word truth, and you see, looking closely, that the letters are all made up of little dots that are words themselves. It says lies. So the truth is constructed of lies. So this is the conventional truths of the world. When we see them on the level of appearance, it's true. But when we zoom in on it, it is all false. It all just has to do with the way that our mental construction. So we can understand this, and His Holiness says this often in the context of quantum physics. So of course, even with classical physics, we understand that when we zoom in on an object, it breaks apart. That it's not as solid as it looks. It's just constructed of atoms. But in quantum mechanics, this takes on even more force. And we see that it actually depends upon how we measure it or how we observe it. That these things don't exist in and of themselves. And then, like an electron, doesn't have any existence in the way that we can talk about it as having this solid existence, and that can be very useful conventionally. We can make a lot of predictions that way, but it's not the way it really is. But of course, so this again, I think Chandrakirti would be pleased with this in the modern distinction between classical and quantum physics. So if somebody wants to put a rocket on the moon, they probably just want to use classical physics. And if somebody keeps arguing, well, you're wrong because it doesn't exist. It's all just with quantum understanding, we can see that it is dissolved under analysis. Well, that's not really useful. The person who wants to put the rocket on the moon is not concerned about that, and actually it is distracting from that. So don't bring ultimate analysis to bear upon the conventional, but at the same time, don't get so attached to the conventional that you think it's the way things really are. It just has to do with the way that we talk about them. So then the last of these three verses is talking about how we analyze things that are birth. So like we have the idea of things that are born from self or mother. This is a common analysis in Buddhist philosophy. That we can't actually find anything. So again, this one, both the first and the third of these, they rely on the second. The second is the main one, the second verse, because it's saying that when we try to analyze birth, we don't find anything. We don't find that it's born from self. We don't find that it's born from other. And so we have to just accept birth. That things are generated as this cause and effect at the level of convention. But not when we analyze it any more deeply. So then the last two verses that I mentioned, so 37 and 38, are just talking about the way that things do exist conventionally. That although the example that's given is like how we say sugyan is like a reflection, right? So a reflection can be something that it doesn't exist when you analyze it, but at the same time it can function. It can have results, and so all phenomena they depend upon emptiness. They don't depend upon some inherent establishment, but still they can function on the conventional level. So His Holiness was saying here, he reflects upon these 5 verses. Really, he usually mentions the 3, but of course the latter 2 we're good to look at too. So he says he reflects upon them every day. So it's good if you have an opportunity. As I mentioned, there's the text illuminating the thought, which is Tsongkhapa's commentary on Chandrakirti. So you'll find this chapter 6 and then verses 34 to 37. Right there, 38. So His Holiness says, when we think about this, then our attachment and our hatred, our anger, then they naturally go down. They decrease. So there's nothing defined. So he said, you say, I'm Korean, I'm Tibetan. It's mere appearance. There's nothing to it, but it's just when analyzed, it's nothing defined. It's not totally non-existent, but at the same time, it's not over the word in Tibetan, suktupa. There's been a lot of dispute about how to translate this word. Thupten Jinpa translated it as sturdy, but really to say it exactly what it means, suktupa would mean like something that if you so it's not like that. He's saying when you analyze things, they can't hold up under analysis, and so it's that. But when we have that sense that things are like that, that they can hold their ground, then we start generating attachment and aversion. And he says then we start getting the self-cherishing. So thinking of oneself as the most important one, and there's no benefit in that. There's so many billions of people in the world, all are the same in wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. So he says, but then through this we can generate compassion, because everyone wants happiness, they don't want suffering, but they don't understand, they don't recognize what are the causes of each. They don't recognize what is the cause of happiness, what is the cause of suffering, and so they end up creating the opposite one. So he said then it's rangjin nipung, which would mean they bring about the ruin of themselves and others. There's a verse from the Bodhisattva Charyavatara he didn't quote, but was it so although they wish to abandon suffering, they run towards the causes of suffering. So although they wish for happiness, they destroy out of ignorance, they destroy their happiness like an enemy. So this is a description of what happens in the world, and we can reflect on that to have compassion for beings who don't realize what they're doing. So then His Holiness also quoted from the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. I'm sure most of you know this verse, the very end, I think it's the fourth to last verse. We quoted it yesterday also. For as long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, and I too remain, and to dispel the misery of the world. So he says, I always pray this way, and that until the end of space, to be able, from life to life, to be able to have such fortitude, to be able to continue benefiting beings. So then His Holiness said, we didn't have any time for question and answer yesterday, so he asked, going to do that today. And then I think he said something here about again, Nagarjuna's text, saying it's very good if you can read chapters 18 and 24, which are the most important chapters. And also I think he said 26. I'm not sure though. But usually 18 and 24 are the ones that are pinpointed as most important. And we'll try to get to those a little bit today too. So the main thing is the way that you think. Somebody was asking a question. I don't think I wrote them the question. Actually, I don't think we heard the question. That's the thing. At least I don't know in English if it was translated, but the questions were in Korean, and then they handed him a little sheet of paper with the question in Tibetan, but it wasn't translated, so we don't know what the question was. But he said the main thing is how you think about it. Think about achieving the benefit of others. And then through all the vicissitudes of difficulties in life, the body won't bother you, experiences the body. So he said with attachment and aversion, then when the object appears is very solid, then we'll be unhappy. But if we think about it as existing in mere name, there'll be less anxiety. It's the best happiness. Otherwise, when we have attachment for those things that appear to us as pleasing or as enticing, and aversion towards those things that appear to us as repulsive, then we'll just have more suffering. So, yeah, so he said that we think about the fault of cherishing oneself. and then the benefits of cherishing others. These are all outlined very clearly in Shantideva's text, actually in chapter 8, and then also in the Lamrim Chenmo, if you have the section on exchanging self for others, then it puts them all in a clear order for meditation. So the second step is to think about the disadvantages of cherishing oneself, and then the third step, cherishing others, advantages of cherishing others. This is within the 5 steps of the exchanging self and other meditation. So then some people consider themselves to practice, he was reading the question here. Some people consider themselves to be great practitioners, yet they show the aspect of being immoral. What do we do about that? Are they real? I think it was something like, are they real practitioners? His Holiness said, you answered your own question. You just have to judge a practitioner by their behavior. So then the next question, he was talking about the mind-only view, Chittamatra view, and then existing in through terminology in terms of the Savatantrika understanding, or the autonomy. This is Bhavaviveka's understanding. So he's saying that there's a difference of subtlety. So these are different ways of understanding emptiness, and the mind-only view is more coarse, and then Savatantrika, Bhavaviveka's view is a little more subtle than that, and more subtle than that is Chandrakirti's view. So saying that we can use these to abandon the obscurations to liberation, which are the afflictive obscurations, we call them, and then the obscurations to omniscience, cognitive obscurations. These are what we abandon to meditation in the Buddhist path. But I think he said it's a bit complicated, so I won't go into it too much here. And then he was saying that the consciousness is not made by the Buddha, nor is it made by karma. It's just naturally a rising thing. So he's saying that on the basis of the clear in knowing, which is the nature of the mind, conventional nature of the mind, then on that we then have the experiences of pleasure and happiness and suffering. So it's to recognize that the mind is fundamental beyond all of that. It's not something that was created through any of the experiences we have. So then His Holiness said, now we're going to get to Saje, to root wisdom. So he basically gave the Lung, the old transmission. He didn't say a lot of commentary. But first he talked about Nagarjuna being the second Buddha. And he was talking about the 3 pinnacles of great speech. So I think he mentioned there's the Buddha, and then Manjushri, and then Nagarjuna. So this is probably, he was quoting from the Lamrim prayer, the Lamrim, requesting prayer of the Lamrim lineage. And he's saying this is the lineage of using reasoning, the profound. And then he was talking about, so he read the first verse. So in Nagarjuna's text, in Wisdom, then the first chapter is called, so let me know, is it too loud for anybody? It's amazing to me that it's not bothering you. I can hardly hear myself. I guess this microphone must be very good at blocking out the background noise. Okay. So the first chapter is called Examining Conditions. Conditions in the sense of causes for something. But the first 2 verses are actually the expression of homage. So they're often not counted as verses of the first chapter. They're just called the verses of homage. So what is it? So whatever is dependent arising, then it is free of the 8, he said, the cessation and so forth, the 8 things. So this is what Nagarjuna says. Gafamepa kemepa chipamepa damepa omepa dromepa kalidom indunchigman dropanishishitampa zupet. So it's gafameching kemepa. So it does not cease, and it is not born. Chipamepa damepa means it is not annihilated, but but is also not permanent. So it's no coming, no going. So it's neither different nor is it one. So these are the 8 reflections, the 8 extremes, it's called. So freedom from that. So it's often understood that what this is saying, it's talking about the perspective of consciousness analyzing the ultimate. So it's saying when somebody has a direct perception of emptiness, none of these things appear. It's not talking about it at the conventional level. Of course, conventionally these things function, but in terms of also, I think maybe the sound might not be bothering you, but I imagine the sunlight might be. So maybe I'll close the blind behind me because you probably can't see me very well. So just 1 minute. Okay. So from the perspective of the consciousness analyzing the ultimate, there is none of these things are findable. So the verse continues, Tropanirshi Jidamba. So Tropanirshi means the pacification of proliferation. So the understanding of proliferation here is the holding to these extremes, holding these things that truly existent. And Shidempa, the one who teaches this peace. So Zope Sangi Manamki Dampadela Chaksala. So I prostrate to that completed Buddha, fully complete Buddha, who is the excellent among speakers. These are the verses of homage. So then His Holiness was mentioning he received the oral transmission of this text from the former Ganan Tripa in Ladakh. So I think he must be referring to Rizong Rinpoche, although he didn't say that, because he is the former Ganan Tripa. Of course, there is many former Ganan Tripas, but he's the only living one, and he's from Ladakh, so it must have been referring to him. Although I know His Holiness has received this text many times, and it's known, of course, he often says the main person from whom he received both this text and Bodhisattvacharya Vatara are his teacher Kunru Rinpoche, when he was in the 1960s, early 1970s as his teacher. So then His Holiness went through chapter 2 after that. So chapter 2 is examining coming and going. I won't say a lot about it now because if we have time at the end, I'll try to make more clear how the chapters work together. And then he went through chapter 3, which is examining the aggregates. And then in chapter 4, which is in examining the constituents. So these are the different ways of breaking down a person and the things that exist. Chapter 3 is, I don't remember. Chapter 3 is examining the sense powers. Then chapter 4 is examining the aggregate. Chapter 5 is examining the constituents. So then in chapter 4, I have a note there, and the few times he did make comments, I had to put a note there. So in chapter 4, we have verses 8 to 9. So Tombaniki Chetetse, Ganshik Lendet Machepa, He Tamshi Lendet Min, Jurpa Charan Supergyur. So he's saying that when somebody is debating about emptiness, then they try to give an answer to defend against it. Then whatever answer they give, it's not, it's the same as a non-answer because it's similar to what is meant to be established. This is quite complicated, these verses. As I've said, Nagarjuna is especially root wisdom is actually harder to understand, I think, than his other texts. It's not something that is very easy just to read. It requires some commentary because you have to understand the context of the debate that's being talked about here. It's the same in verse 9. So whoever tries to point out a fault, it's not a real fault. They're not. It's the same as not positing a fault because it's similar to what's going to be established. So when we say something is similar to what's going to be established, this means that it's in English, in Western philosophy, it's called begging the question. It means that you're using what is meant to be proven as a way of proving it. So you can't do that until you've proved it. So it's not a effective reasoning in that way. So this is a kind of debate against people who debate against emptiness. So what we'll do in chapter 24, I think is the best one to go over a little later. That is the most clear and is essentially a chapter of responding to debates. And then it becomes very clear what the debates are. So I think it's better, I could get Tsongkhapa's commentary here and try to go through this verse, but it might be clearer, I think, if we read chapter 24 a little later. So then chapter 5 is, as I said, examining the constituents. And chapter 6 is examining attachment and the one who was attached. So this is an interesting point that we talk about desire, and then I am the one who is the desirous one. But then how do we distinguish those? Is there me who has desire, and the desire is something different? So in what do I have desire in the sense that I have a cat? So I have the cat is outside, and I can point, that's the cat, and this is me. But then is the desire like that, or is there some me that's separate from the desire? So we talk about it that way. We say that I have desire, but then we have to examine, does it exist that way? Is it findable that way? So that's chapter 6. Then chapter 7 is one of the longest chapters. I think chapter 1, about we say birth, abiding, and disintegration. So the three qualities of something that is compounded phenomenon that it first comes into existence, and it abides, and then it disintegrates. So examining those. So he stopped on verse 16 there. So let me look at 16. Oh yeah, because this is about dependent arising. So His Holiness always says that dependent arising is the meaning of emptiness. We shouldn't get too attached to emptiness meaning nothingness. So it says tenjing wagang and yang and So the thing, whatever is dependent arisen, it is by nature pacified in the sense that it is not inherently existent. So therefore, things which are in the process of being born, and also things which are born, are pacified, meaning that they're not findable in their analysis. This is the interpretation of what it means by pacified. And then finally, the last verses of the chapter. So, actually, first he had verse 29. Let's see. Yeah. Which is, so it's just saying the opposite, that if things cannot be reasonably established as being born, then they can't reasonably be established as ceasing, because something that is never born cannot cease. And then here, so then the last two verses, or especially so the verse 33, 34, but only the latter two lines of verse 33 he gave. So so this is just saying, he's just established through this chapter that there is no that there is no compounded phenomena, because there is no birth, disintegration, birth, abiding, and disintegration. So then it says, how can there be non-compounded phenomena? Because if the thing that seems more real to us, compounded phenomena like the forms that we see, if they don't exist inherently, then how can there be non-compounded things like space? So then it gives the example nilam dishin jigumashin. So it's like a dream, it's like an illusion. It's like a city of Gandharvas. It's interesting, the word, so This can be very confusing. I don't know if any of you have ever had this question. What is the city of Gandharvas? The reason I ask this is if any of you know a little bit about Buddhist philosophy, you'll know that we call Gandharva, which means scent eater, is the word that is used for a bardo being. But bardo beings don't live in cities. Bardo beings migrate from life to life. So actually, this is something we only learned really this year when we were studying Vinaya. It's not that it has anything to do with the Vinaya, but in the context of one of the vows, this point came up. So the word Gandharva does not only mean a bardo being. Actually, it can refer to a class of gods. So there are desire realm gods, and one of them is called the Gandharvas. They live in celestial palaces in the sky, in these cities. This is what is meant by a city of Gandharva. It's not a city of bardo beings. It's a city of celestial gods who live in a city that is just an appearance to mind. And in case you're wondering what vow that came up in, it's in the fourth vow of the Gelong. It is not to lie about spiritual attainments. So to claim that one has seen a city of Gandharvas would be constitute a defeat, because it shows that you're claiming you have clairvoyance. It's not something ordinary people can see. So then it says, Dejin Kedan Dejin Ne. So in the same way, just as like a dream, like an illusion, like a city of Gandharvas, then there is birth, then there is abiding, and then likewise there is disintegration. They exist in that way. So I might have mentioned yesterday, Nagarjuna's text 70 stanzas in emptiness. That text is understood to be a digression from this verse. This verse says that things exist only as like a dream. So then somebody argues, well, then how can anything function? So on the basis of that, then we have this text 70 stanzas in emptiness, showing how within emptiness there can still be birth and abiding and disintegration at the conventional level. So next we have chapter 8, which is, we say maybe actors and actions, the person doing and the action done, and how do these relate to each other. And then chapter 9, which is examining what went before. So it's talking about, it's really talking about, for example, we have the action of seeing, to see, and the thing that I see, and the thing that is seen, and the action of seeing, which comes first. And in all contexts, that's problematic. Whatever one comes first. If the thing being seen comes first, well, it's not being seen because there's nobody seeing it yet. But if the seer comes first, he's not seeing anything because the thing being seen doesn't exist yet. And there's no action of seeing without either of those, so there's no action of seeing. It can't be first either. So it's examining all of those together. And then he gave the first verse from that. So Tatanyan la zopatang. So Tatanyan, it means what the seeing and hearing, but really it's talking about eyes and ears actually. Tatanyan la zopatang, sorso tayang wong chepa. So also feelings and the empowering conditions for those. So this is actually somebody else saying this. Often sometimes the first verse of the chapter will be an opponent speaking. So this person is saying that they exist before, that the eyes, the seers, they exist before what is seen. They're just waiting to see it. So that's one's other position, and then the rest of the chapter is going to try to negate that position and show how that doesn't work. So then we have chapter 10, fire and fuel. So this is understood to be giving an example, a more clear example. We have fire and we have fuel, but how do they relate to each other? Is there any such thing as fire without fuel, or fuel without fire? And is fire burns fuel? Well, that's problematic also, because what does it mean to consume the fuel? Really, is the fire harming the fuel, or is the fuel feeding the fire? And which is the cause, which is the effect? We can see under analysis that these terms aren't findable in the objects. And as we know from modern chemistry, that what we call fire is really the combustion of the fuel. So it's not that there is there's two different things that exist. but we talk about it that way. So it's used as an example of something that's maybe easier to understand, and then to apply that same example to things that seem more concrete and real. So then he went through chapters 11, 12, 13. Chapter 11 is examining the past extreme and the future extreme, or the past that. So really, birth and death. How do they relate to each other? Chapter 12 is examining. It's called examining what is mine and what is made by me and what is made by others. But it takes the example of suffering. Is suffering caused by oneself, or is it caused by something else external to oneself? Showing the absurdity of either position. And then chapter 13, which is one of the most important chapters, is about compounded phenomena, or the compounding factors, we'd say. So in chapter 13, His Holiness quoted the last two verses of this chapter, 7 and 8. So so if there is a slight thing that is not empty, then there is a slight emptiness. Emptiness exists slightly. But because there is nothing at all which is not empty, then there is no emptiness either. The point here is not to get attached to emptiness as a real thing either. So then we have Gyawanam Gitompani Tatung is saying that the Buddhas have all taught emptiness in order to free us from our views, from our extreme views. But Gamba Tompanita Wadera is saying that so the one who holds to emptiness, in the sense that holds to emptiness is a real thing, and that one is said to be incurable, because you've taken the medicine and made it into poison. Emptiness is supposed to be the cure for extreme views, but if you take emptiness as a dogmatic position, then there's no hope. There's no way to be free of that. And then finally, chapter 14 is examining, we say, trepa in English would be contact, I think, meeting. So when two things meet, what does it mean for two things to meet? And really what that's talking about especially is objects and experience, that my mind meets its object. So the one who sees the thing that is seen, all of these, how do they relate to each other? How do they meet? Does the seer meet with the thing seen? All of these are problematic. So His Holiness, he just finished that much, 14 chapters, which is, it's about half the text, almost exactly half the text. So I'll come back to the text if we have some time, but I'll finish what he said, and then we can go to the text a bit. So he said, we did a slight meditation on emptiness today. And he was suggesting also meditate on bodhicitta. He said within this bodhicitta, the two main ways to do that are the sevenfold cause and effect instructions passed down in Tibet through Atisha, and then the exchanging self and others. Both of these are outlined in the Lamrim, but he was saying for him, His Holiness, then the exchanging self and others is especially powerful. And he quoted a few verses from the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. So Banshi Dakshan Shenda Mi Nirikawadopade Datan Shendu Jechawa Samweda Prachipracha. So it's saying the one who wishes to quickly liberate himself and others should practice the great secret of exchanging self and others. So this is the first verse in chapter 8. Let's see what number of verse it is. I'll tell you, and then you can find it yourself. Verse 120 of so chapter 8, verse 120. So from that, then Shantideva goes on to explain the practice of exchanging self and others, and then His Holiness gave 3 verses that he often quotes. So those are verses 129 to 131. So verse 1, Jikten Dewa Jinipa, so whatever happiness there is in the world, that comes from wishing for the happiness of others. And they can do they conduct is whatever suffering there is in the world, it comes from wishing for one's own happiness. And then Mando Sheta Chichik Mo. So what need is there to say much? Chico Rangidon Chetan, Tupon Shengidon Zepa, the Nikini Kiperto, is the childish beings, which is immature beings, they think only of their own happiness. But the Buddhas work solely for the welfare of others. So observe the difference between the two. Observe the difference in results between those two attitudes. And then Dakte Shengi Dunalda Gana Dewa Michena. So if I don't exchange my happiness for the suffering of others, Sangini Midrupching, Hornayan Dewa Me, saying, I won't achieve Buddhahood, but even within samsara, I won't be happy. So His Holiness, he often quotes these verses, and this is kind of the essence of the exchanging self and others meditation. And then also he quoted from chapter 7, Dhamjasambhitajjane. So this in chapter 7 of Bodhisattva Charyavatara is verse verse 30. Chapter 7, verse 30. So mount on the horse of bodhicitta that dispels all unhappiness and which we say in English is like tiredness, I guess you could say, but sort of fatigue maybe, fatigue and unhappiness. And then dewe dene drowala semje chujigilo gyor. So if you're going from happiness to happiness, then what knowing person would procrastinate or would feel any sense of hesitation to engage in that? So he quoted these and he said, and then he gave the example, I am one, others are countless. So he said he thinks about these. He often quotes those verses. So it's clear he considers them some of the most important ones. So then His Holiness said, there's the benefits of bodhicitta. It's capable of fulfilling the needs of self and of others. He said when you get up in the morning to focus on that. It's the main thing in the morning. So please, he said for him it is. So you do too. Please as much as you can. But from life to life, and again you quoted this verse from the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, as long as space remains, the one you quoted earlier. So to continue working for the benefit of others. From life to life. He said, now we've attained a human body and we've met with the teachings. We have this opportunity. So from life to life, we can quickly accumulate the accumulations to achieve enlightenment and attain enlightenment first to the path of accumulation, the path of preparation, and seeing and so forth. So wish for Buddhahood is not just mere words. So he said, imagine, so then he was talking about visualization here. So imagine the Buddha is right in front of you, and the Nalanda masters. He was saying that I am Nagarjuna's follower, His Holiness was saying. He says that of all of these masters, that I'm the very last one. I'm the least of his followers. There's a student like Chandrakirti, and then so on and so forth, and then finally me, he said. So we are all his students. So he said, even if there's a difficult time in the world, then for one's personal experience, it can be a fortunate time. We can make this time into a meaningful time for us. And then he was mentioning, as we went over a bit yesterday, if you can add the path of Tantra to that, then dispel the more coarse levels of mind and manifest the more subtle levels of mind, then it's possible to manifest the primordial mind of clear light, and take that as a path. So we mentioned the meaning clear, the example clear light and the meaning clear light. So what this means, just very briefly, we have the completion stage, which is the most advanced stage of the tantric path, of the highest yoga tantra path, and then the stages of we call the isolation of body, isolation of speech, isolation of mind, and then the illusory body, clear light, and the unification. So when somebody achieves the isolation of mind, which has to do with being able to put all the energy winds into the central channel at the heart, when they achieve the end of that, they actually access the clear light. That is called the example clear light. The meaning being that it does not realize emptiness directly because the person has not yet achieved the state of an Arya. It's still the real clear light, so it's actually the same clear light that is access to death in ordinary experience, but the person has not realized emptiness directly. So it's from the side of the object, it's still the example clear light. And then one arises from that clear light as the impure illusory body. This is the stage of illusory body, and it's called impure because the person hasn't abandoned afflictions yet. But later, then they ran into that clear light and perceive emptiness directly. That is called the meaning clear light because it has a direct perception of emptiness. And then when they arise from that, then that illusory body is now called the pure illusory body because it has abandoned afflictions. So this is a unique aspect of the tantric path that one abandons the afflictions in one session. There's nothing like that in the sutra path. As soon as one achieves the direct perception of emptiness, then one has achieved liberation from samsara. But then still has to achieve and abandon the cognitive obscurations. That takes a little longer, but still relatively short time if one is doing it with this tantric path. So he's saying that illusory body, then that lasts until space ends. It's not entirely clear what this means sometimes in the text, because it says if somebody achieves the pure illusory body, then it's 100% certain they will achieve Buddhahood in this life. But it's a question because it could mean because they're no longer attached to their physical body. When somebody achieves the pure illusory body, then actually from their experience, it's like they've left their physical body behind. And there's different opinions on whether they arise in the same space or they arise some like kind of above us and behind or something. But they're no longer attached to the body in the sense that they're not just attached like they have attachment, but that karmically there is no more relation with the body. They've achieved a separate body. But then in order to benefit beings, they enter back into their coarse body. So like a puppet master manipulating the body. So in that sense, even if that coarse body were to die, they don't experience death from their own side. So whether it means that they have to achieve Buddhahood within that life of that coarse body, or whether it means that because the body they have does not experience death, and so they will not have the experience of death before they achieve full enlightenment, is not entirely clear. I don't know. I think most people have the opinion that it's talking about that coarse physical body, so that within that lifetime. But sometimes I wonder, just because that would imply that there's an awful lot of fully enlightened beings. So maybe there are, I don't know. Of course, it's not many people who achieve this state. It's actually very advanced, extremely advanced, but nevertheless, I don't know how many people are fully enlightened. This remains a question. It's something that we investigate here in the monastery. So maybe someday we'll understand. So His Holiness then said, don't be depressed. It says jumpa in Tibetan is like, don't be depressed is probably the best translation of that. He says, thinking, I can't get that, I can't have that, I can't achieve that. So think about, have confidence in yourself. He said, think about the Rik, we often read that as Buddha nature, but really the lineage, or Lama Zopa Rinpoche says it should be called race. It's understood that we are all of the Buddha race, that we have this natural capacity. It's not just something that's external to us. It's something that we carry within ourselves, this possibility to achieve enlightenment. So it's just a matter of developing that. He said, think of the Buddha, and then think of the 6 ornaments and the 2 supreme ones. So this is talking about 8 of the great masters from India. So the 6 ornaments are first of all Nagarjuna and Asanga, because Nagarjuna is the greatest master according to the profound path of emptiness, and then Asanga in terms of the extensive path practices of method, so like of generosity and ethical discipline and so forth. And then the next two are the Dharmakirti and Dignaga, or Dignaga and Nagarjuna, I should say in that order. Dignaga, and Dharmakirti, the great trailblazers of the path of reasoning and using logic to establish the insights of Buddhism. And then, oh, sorry. So in the middle, I should have mentioned. So Nagarjuna and Aryadeva, those should go together, because Aryadeva was Nagarjuna's close disciple, and it's understood that his writing should not be understood as separate from Nagarjuna's, that it was so close in meaning, because he followed so clearly Nagarjuna's understanding that it can be taken as authoritative in the same way that Nagarjuna's can be. And then Vasubandhu, who was Asanga's half-brother, and who clarified a lot of points that Asanga had touched upon. And then finally, Dignaga and Dharmakirti, so the trailblazers of reason. Those are the 6 ornaments, and then the 2 supreme ones are Gunaprabha and Shakyaprabha. So these are the clarifiers of the Vinaya, the teachings on Vinaya. So this is what we've been studying this year. I've been very impressed, I must say. Actually, I really like the Vinaya. It's quite amazing. It's a lot more deep. It's a lot more, I would say, subtle than is often presented. When you really read the Vinaya closely, you see that it's not so black and white. The Buddha was very attentive to all kinds of different circumstances that could arise. It's not meant to be an obstruction. If there's a case where the practice of the Vinaya obstructs one's spiritual progress, then actually the rules should change. The Buddha was very clear about that. It's a matter of understanding how to do so in the proper way, so you don't just act recklessly, but really understanding the Vinaya, then it can be a lot more fluid. It's quite an amazing system of thought. And so Gunaprabha, he codified this in his text, the root text on Vinaya, the Sutra, Vinaya Sutra, which is the basis for what we study here. And then Shakyaprabha, who wrote some commentaries, I think more focusing on the novice vows, actually. But then what we study in the monastery is Kunkin Sonawa. Sonawa was a Tibetan in the 13th century. Actually, not Tibetan, I shouldn't say that. I suppose it depends how you want to classify it, but he was a Munpa. So he was from Arunachal Pradesh, which is actually in India now, but historically it was part of Tibet. He was from a small monastery in a very remote area, but somehow he became what's generally considered the greatest Vinaya scholar in Tibetan history. And although I am not an expert, I can't claim for other countries, but it seems likely to me he was the greatest Vinaya scholar in any history. It's just that his text is incredibly detailed, and having studied it now for 1 year, we've done 1/3 of his text. I think it would take a lifetime to master all the details of his text, but the fact that he put that all together based upon all these thousands of other texts that were from India, that when he was living in a little remote place with this, probably, we'd say, the text at that time, it's not like you could just open a PDF file and search for what you wanted to look for. It was all these papers piled up. So yeah, it's quite, I don't know how he did that, but anyway, Tsongkhapa actually said he didn't write much on Vinaya because Sonawa was so clear, there was no need for him to clarify it anymore. So those are the six ornaments and the 2 supreme ones. And then His Holiness was talking about Avalokiteshvara, being the supreme deity of Tibet specifically. He's talking about in Lhasa, the connection with Avalokiteshvara. So he thinks in the morning of meeting him, he said, of meeting the statue that he has a very strong connection with, a sense of Mugu. So Mugu is like, we translate it as like faith and respect, or this sort of longing desire, even you could say, kind of, devotion to the deity. So He said, now we're going to take the Bodhisattva vows. He said, I am a Buddhist monk, but you can think of that disappears, and really, I am Avalokiteshvara, so you can generate bodhicitta on that basis. We said we've achieved the human body. We've met with the Mahayana teachings, and we have the chance to study, to contemplate, to meditate, and then have experience. We said I make great efforts. So the word hata pata in Tibetan, I don't know if it's really a Tibetan word. I don't know where it comes from. A lot of people say this in the monastery, so I've gotten used to it. It doesn't sound Tibetan to me, and it's not. I've never seen it in the dictionary. But hata pata, it's just what they say. Somebody who's always putting effort. They never get slack about anything. They always show up for, in the monastery. That would mean they always show up for all the events, all the pujas, all the debate. Always putting effort. They never seem to be bored. So he said that I try to make that effort. So you too, please be hata pata, he said. So that was the end of the talk for this morning. So as I said, we have about 40 minutes left, and I thought to just go a little bit to outline Nagarjuna's text so that you have a chance and you can study it. So what I'll do, I wanted to go through the chapters I mentioned on the basis of Tsongkhapa's outline. So I've said yesterday that Tsongkhapa wrote a text called Ocean of Reasoning, which is a commentary on Nagarjuna's root wisdom. It's one of the last texts Tsongkhapa wrote on sutra toward the end of his life. So he wrote it, I think, when he was 53. So then we had to memorize this year. You see, we studied Tsongkhapa's biography, so we had to memorize all these details of his life. So he wrote it when he was 53, I think, when he was staying at Serachuding, actually. So this is especially, we had to know this fact because Serachuding was where Sera Monastery was later built. It was just a remote area where he was in retreat, and he had a vision in the sky of golden letters from the Pariniparamita Sutra, and then the letters, talking about emptiness, and then they descended into where Sera was later built. So it's supposed to be auspicious sign for Sera, but it also inspired him to write two texts: the Essence of Eloquence, and then this the Ocean of Reasoning. The Essence of Eloquence is more of a general presentation of emptiness. It's generally considered his most concise and clear presentation of emptiness. So we study that a lot in the monastery. And then this much longer text, the Ocean of Reasoning, which is a word-for-word commentary on Nagarjuna. So based on what I said before, Tsongkhapa said he didn't write that much on Vinaya because Sonala had already clarified it. And he said the same thing about Abhidharma. He didn't write about Abhidharma because the Chim Jampayang, who was the earlier Tibetan, had already clarified that so well. But what he did mainly write on was Madhyamaka, and then the perfection of wisdom, the Brahmanya-paramita, which is the stages of the path, and then Tantra, and then also we could say, on the Pramana, the logic, but he didn't actually write that much himself. But his students, Gyaltsabje and Khedrubje, wrote a lot about that, and it seems it's based on teachings he gave. So even though he didn't actually write that much down, he clearly held it to be something that needed to be clarified. So he was clarifying these teachings because there had been other commentaries on root wisdom before that in Tibet. The most notable one being by Macha Gandhip Sundru, the translator, Macha Lo Tsawa, which means peacock translator. I think it's actually because Macha is the name of the clan. Many of the early translators were named after the clan. And so in his text, Ocean of Reasoning, then Tsongkhapa, he outlines, he puts the chapters of the 27 chapters of root wisdom together in a way that to clarify how they work together. So he changes the order a bit to show it. So again, really, you can hear me perfectly fine, can you? I cannot hear my own voice. Now it's gone stopped for a second, but it's very, very loud in here. I'm glad you can hear me. So he says that this text, Root Wisdom, it is mainly can be divided into analyzing emptiness of phenomena and emptiness of self, of person, sorry. Selflessness of phenomena, selflessness of persons. So first of all, there is chapter 18. So chapter 18, as I mentioned, is one of the what we consider the two most important chapters, 18 and 24. So 18 is negating specifically the conceived object of the apprehensions of a self of person. So that is the starting point for the analysis of selflessness of person, even though it's the 18th chapter. And then on the basis of that, we have then chapter 2. So chapter 2, I mentioned, is the coming and going. So somebody says, if there's no person, then who goes from life to life? And who came here from the last life? So it's showing that coming and going also are empty. And then in chapter 8, which is the example of actors and actions. So then somebody says, well, if there's no self, who creates karma? If there's no going from life to life, because it's from that last point, then who creates karma and who experiences it? But it's showing that the creator of a karma and the experience of the effect is also empty. And then chapter 9, which is the examination of what went before, I said. So the experiencer. So in this context, it's talking about the one who we say appropriates birth. So somebody says if there's no self, then there's nobody who we say Niralempa. It's like the appropriating aggregates. Nobody who takes on a physical form. So then it's showing that the emptiness of the one who went before. And then chapter 10 is the examination of fire and fuel. So this is that the last chapter, chapter 9, was a showing the reasoning, and then this is just giving an example, a clearer example of that. That in the way that there is no fire, there's no person taking on, in the same way that as an example of that, fire and fuel. So I can give a quotation about that from chapter 10 that makes it clear how that relates. So chapter 10, verses, what is it, 14, 15. So he said, it just says, so it says wood actually, but it should be understood as fuel. So fuel is not fire, but apart from fuel, there is no fire. Fire is not endowed with fuel, but fire does not have fuel, and nor does fuel have fire. Then that is the example. And then he says, through fire and fuel, then one can understand the self and the stages of appropriating a life, of taking on a birth. And other things like pots and cloth and all kinds of other objects, they're all explained together with fuel and fire. So by explaining one can understand all of them. So then he ends the chapter, as he often ends, with a sort of a pithy phrase to explain the importance of emptiness. He says, those who say that the self and other that exist, and that they are the same or they're different from each other. The person who teaches that way, I don't think they're very knowledgeable. That's basically the point. He's saying they haven't understood the meaning of the Buddha's teaching. Then we have chapter 11 and 12. So chapter 11 is the past and the future, not in the sense of time so much, but the where one has gone before, where one will go in the future, maybe say past and future lives. And then chapter 12 is suffering made from self or from other. So these are, again, if there is no self, but somebody says, but there must be a person who cycles in samsara, or there must be a person who is the possessor of the suffering. So then to show the emptiness of those concepts. So that is the examination of the selflessness of the person. Then we have the examination of the selflessness of phenomena. This starts with chapter 1, the examination of conditions, the very first verse of chapter 1, not from self, not from other, not from both, not from neither. No thing at any time has ever been born in any way. So this is the starting point of the analysis of the selflessness of phenomena, that things are not inherently established. They don't inherently produced. So that's the first chapter, is then examining that in more detail. And then we have chapters 3, 4, and 5. We skipped chapter 2 because that was, again, part of the examination of the selflessness of person. So 3, 4, and 5 are the examination of the sense powers and the aggregates, and then the constituents, which are the things that make up a person. So we say that first we examine the person, now we examine the parts of the person. So like in the Heart Sutra, when it says the 5 aggregates also are empty of inherent nature, not only is the person, but then the aggregates themselves. Because somebody argues that in the sutra, it talks about the aggregates and the constituents and the sense spheres and the sources of experience. So those must exist because the Buddha talked about them. So it's to show that those are also not inherently existent. Then chapters 6, 7, and 8. So I mentioned chapter 6 about the desire and the desirous one. And then chapter 7 about that which is production and abiding and cessation. So the 3 stages of we say compounded phenomena. So somebody is saying that and also chapter 8 actually. So this is the actor in action. So this is included in both selflessness of phenomena and person. So here we have somebody argues that constituents and aggregates and so forth, they must exist because there is a person endowed with desire, first of all, chapter 6. And then because there is the qualities of compounded phenomena, that they are born, they abide, and they cease. This is one of the strongest arguments, saying that essentially the world functions, whether we believe in it or not. So it can't just be a creation of our mind. Quite an interesting argument. And then finally, that from causes, then there is an actor, a person who behaves, who does things, who does actions. So again, that things must come from causes. So these are the examinations of selflessness of person and of phenomena. Then we have chapter 13, the examination of compounding factors. This is more general. It's somebody says that there is a proof that there is a self of both phenomena and person, because that things are compounded. They give results. So it's then examining that. So we'll look at chapter 13 for just a minute, because again, that's a very important chapter. So yeah, Chombendegi Chogangshik Luaneni Zunche Song, Ruchitamchi Luecho, Deni Deni Zumpayin. So it's saying that the Buddha said that whatever is a phenomenon, that is anything that is deceptive is false. And all compounded phenomena are deceptive, so therefore they are false. He's saying that they're not truly existent because they are deceptive in the sense that they don't exist in the way they appear. And then the last 2 verses I already quoted before. Well, actually, I like this also. Verse 5 is very powerful, I think. So, Deni Dani Shengir Mei, Sheni Layang Yomayin. So it doesn't have. So things do not change into something else. And also, they don't exist in something else. The reason being that the young do not grow old, and the old also do not grow old. This is something to reflect upon. We have this we say convention of, we say that this person grows old. But who grows old? Does the young boy grow into an old man, or does the old man grow into an old man? But neither of those work, because the young boy is the young boy. He doesn't become an old man. There is no young boy who is an old man. But the old man doesn't become an old man either. So, of course, conventionally, it sounds almost like it doesn't make any sense. It makes sense to say the boy becomes an old man. But what if we actually pinpoint what does that mean? Is it like this boy is now an old man, but he's no longer there, so there's no boy to be the old man, and there was no old man before who later becomes an old man. So nothing becomes something else. And he also gives the example of milk and yogurt. The milk doesn't become yogurt because when the yogurt's there, the milk is gone. So again, it might sound like just a play with words, but it's showing the way that our language is perhaps inadequate to express what's actually happening. So it doesn't exist in the way that it appears to our thought consciousness, which is essentially similar to the way that we use language. So then the last two verses I meant His Holiness quoted earlier about that the one who is attached to emptiness as a view, then that one is incurable, because emptiness is the pure itself. So that's chapter 13. Then chapter 14, 15, and 16 are similar in attacking some of the proofs that are used to establish true existence, in terms of both selflessness of the person and selflessness of phenomena, but they're a little, it says that sometimes they distinguish. So whereas chapter 13 doesn't make a distinction between selflessness of person and phenomena, 13, 14, 15, they sometimes focus on one or the other. So 14 was the last chapter His Holiness read today, about things, when things meet. What does it mean for things to meet? 15 is about nature. I mentioned this yesterday, this idea of that the word nature can, in some contexts, mean a findable nature. So then that's the object of negation. But in other contexts, it can mean emptiness itself. And this is actually, there are different interpretations of some of these verses. The very first verse of chapter 15, Ranjing Gyuda Kemeni, Joy Rik Mayano, Yudan Kemei Jumwahi, Ranjin Jepa Yur, Ranjin Jepa Jencha, Tito de Via Rumonju, Ranjin Dakni, Chemintang, Shemba de Pamebayin. So it's said that there's three qualities of nature, something that exists naturally, that it is unmade by something else, and it is uncontrived, and it does not depend on something else. So in the context of the object of negation, it's saying that something appears truly existent, that it is not produced in dependence upon something else. And it is not contrived. It is not something that is just simply made by mind. And it does not rely on something else. It exists independently of other things. That is in terms of the object of negation. But it can also be understood that he's talking about emptiness. Emptiness is not made by something else. It's not something that is created later. It is just the nature of things from the beginning. It is not contrived, because it is not something that's created by conceptual thought. It can be experienced directly as the true nature, the final nature of things. And that it does not rely on something else, in the sense that it's being empty does not rely on something else to prop it up. Otherwise, it would, when that thing that was making it empty was no longer functioning, it wouldn't be empty anymore. But it's simply there in and of itself. So there's a lot of talk about this. Different Tibetan scholars had many different interpretations of how this works. Some of them take it to mean that emptiness is a truly existent thing. That emptiness has these three natures. There's the three qualities of being in nature, and therefore it truly exists. But Tsongkhapa did not consider that to be the right interpretation. But it's quite a lot of discussion about these verses, chapter 15. Then we have chapter 16, which is about bondage and freedom. So really samsara and nirvana. So again, somebody would argue that there must be true existence, because there's suffering and there's freedom from suffering. If you don't think anything exists, then as we said earlier, then when you have suffering in your life, does it really help you? You have to face the facts that there's suffering. So on some level, that's true, but doesn't mean that it has to be an inherently existent thing. It's important to distinguish between those. So next we have chapter 17. So it's that. So first in chapter 16, there was negating that samsara is inherently existent. So actually, I'll give a quote from chapter 16 also would be useful. So the last verse of chapter 16. So For when nirvana is not produced, then there is no dispelling of samsara. So what is samsara? And you check what is the nirvana. What are these things? They're just concepts. They don't not findable in our analysis. So he's negating that these exist inherently. So chapter 17, actually the first quite a few verses. Let's see, count. Yeah, I think maybe it's the first 19 or 20 verses. They're all the presentation of the other person, the opponent, describing all the facets of karma and saying the Buddha described all of these details of karma. So therefore, it's a real thing. The Buddha talks about it. You can't just say it's all false. So then it's negating this idea that there is a real karma, because the chapter 17 is about karma. And then chapter 19, so we skipped because if you remember, chapter 18 was the basis for the renegation of the self of phenomena. So that was much more, that was described first. But then we have chapter 19, which is about time. It's a short chapter, but very interesting. So it's saying that that functioning things must really exist because there is real time. Things exist in time. There's past, present, and future. So it's showing that these are also just merely labeled. And then chapter 20 is saying, well, if there must be real time. So it's again digressing from that, because there is time is a necessary condition for results to arise. There can't be any results if there's no passage of time. So chapter 20 is about what is it? Yeah. We say what it's in English. It's so conglomeration or collection. That thing, the causes. The causes, mainly it's talking about the causes and conditions coming together to produce a result. So this is a real thing. And then negating that is real. And then in chapter 21, again, somebody is defending the true existence of time. Because there is that which arises and that which ceases. So things exist in time. But again, it's negating that those are real things. So then chapter 2 moves on to coming back to samsara. It's saying there must be samsara because there is an end of samsara. There's a Buddha. Chapter 2 is about the Buddha. That's the chapter, examining the Tathagata. So it's saying that things must be real because the cause must be real because the result is real. There can't be a real Buddha if there's no real sentient being that eventually becomes a Buddha. Then within that, it also examines the fivefold analysis comes here in relation to the Buddha actually, but His Holiness always says we should also apply this to self, to one's own self. So so it's that not the aggregates, so the Buddha is not the aggregates, but he is also not different from the aggregates. He doesn't possess the aggregates, and the aggregates don't possess him, or he doesn't exist in the aggregates, and he's not the one endowed with aggregates. So what is the Tathagata? So it's the fivefold analysis, and then Chandrakirti, if any of you know, he adds two more analyses to this, so that it's the person is also not the collection of the aggregates, nor is the person the shape of the aggregates. But this is a very important point. His Holiness often says he reflects on this verse every day. It's the very first verse of chapter 22. But then he replaces, so when it says Dejin Jepa Punden Min, Dejin Jepa Gangjigen, he replaces it with Dakshe Chawa Punden Min, Dakshe Chawa Gangjigen. So rather than saying, what is the Tathagata, what the Tathagata is not endowed with the aggregates, it's saying, what is this thing that I call self? And this thing I call self is not endowed with the aggregates. Then we have chapter 24, which is, as I said before, probably the most important chapter and the most clear also. It could be a text in and of itself. It's almost as long as some of Nagarjuna's shorter texts. So this is examining the Four Noble Truths. And it's essentially a dispelling dispute chapter. It's a dispelling disputes to his philosophy, because somebody says, well, so the first verse of the chapter, Oh yeah, so it's saying, if all of those things are empty, then there is no arising and there is no cessation. And for you too, the Four Noble Truths, it follows that they don't exist. So it's saying that you've destroyed the Buddha's teaching because everything is empty. So Nagarjuna turns this around. Quite a few verses he uses to turn this reasoning around, and finally comes up in verse verse 20, I think. Yeah, verse 20. And it's the same. It's just saying, if everything was not empty, then there is no arising and there's no cessation. And for you, the Four Noble Truths do not exist. So he's saying it's the exact opposite. It's because things are empty that there can be anything at all, that there can be Four Noble Truths. If there was no emptiness, then there would be nothing at all, because the only way things can exist. So His Holiness said this is, or it's not His Holiness. This is the Kappa saying this is a dispelling disputes to all of the chapters. It's a response. Somebody is kind of responding to everything he said so far, and then Nagarjuna responds to that. And similarly with chapter 25, it's talking about nirvana. That nirvana then doesn't exist for you. Then chapter 26 is about the 12 links of dependent arising, dependent origination. So Kappa says there's two ways to understand how this fits into the overall structure of the text. One is that in chapter 24, so in chapter 24 verse 18 is probably the most important verse of the whole text. So that which is emptiness is that which is dependent arising. This is what we call emptiness. That is dependent designation. It is indeed the middle way. So it's saying that he's equating emptiness and dependent arising. So then in chapter 26, which is about the 12 links of dependent arising, it's saying, because Nagarjuna has said, or the Buddha has said even in the sutra, that whoever sees the dependent arising, then they see the essence of the Four Noble Truths and the essence of the Buddha's teaching. So what is dependent arising? So that's one way to understand chapter 26. Or the other way is that the first 25 chapters taught emptiness, through which, if one does not understand it or is confused towards it, one cycles in samsara. And if one understands it properly, a lack of confusion, then one turns away from samsara. And therefore, what are the stages of entering and exiting from samsara? And this is the links of dependent origination. And then finally, chapter 27, which is examination of views. This is actually quite complex. It's an interesting chapter to put at the end. So we often talk about, some of you might know, the 62 extreme views. If you're interested in this is in the Brahma Net Sutra. The Brahma, what is it in Sanskrit? Net, I forget. But anyway, this Brahma Net Sutra is actually in the Pali Canon. If you have the Digha Nikaya, this book that was translated by Maurice Walsh, it's with some publications. They have the whole Pali Canon. You can probably get this green book, or the long discourses of the Buddha, Digha Nikaya. So the very first sutra, only 16, I think, in the book, because they're all long, even though it's a long book. So this is the Brahma Net Sutra. It should not be confused with another sutra of the same name. There's a Mahayana sutra called the Brahma Net Sutra, but it's totally different. It has to do with the Bodhisattva vows. So in this sutra, then the Buddha talks about 62 wrong views that people can have. such as I existed before or I did not exist before, these kind of things. But some of them are quite detailed. Some of them are quite interesting to think about. He talks about people who achieve clairvoyance and they remember their past lives, but then they generate wrong views on that basis. So they, for example, they remember their past life as a formless realm God, and they therefore conclude that all the beings arise from nothingness. Or they remember their gods who remember their past life, and they conclude that they've existed forever. They think that this world has existed forever, things like this. So all kinds of extreme views. There are 62, but then they're summarized in 14 wrong views, which is what Nagarjuna presents in this last chapter. And then showing all of the problems with these views. So Tsongkhapa says, well, this is how this fits in, is that if you understand the emptiness of a dependent arising, then it says that there is no basis for any of these wrong views. So it's to establish the meaning of that statement, and that's presenting these views in this 22nd chapter, the last chapter. And then finally, the very last verse of the text, so I prostrate to the Buddha who, through his great compassion, in order to dispel all the views, taught the Dharma. So it's understood to be the extreme views, all wrong views. So this is, sometimes it's quoted that this is the only chapter, the only verse in the entire text that talks about compassion. So some people argue that it's showing that even though this is a text about emptiness, still it talks about the stages of the path, because it's relating it all to compassion, to the compassion of the Buddha and teaching us. But it's, of course, given much more extensively in Nagarjuna's later text, or actually earlier text, but different text, Precious Garland, where he talks a lot more about about compassion, the stages of the path. But there's just a very little bit of it at the end here. So that's a brief summary. So hopefully, if you have a chance, you can read more about this this text. And there's many ways to approach it. This is why 2,000 years later, there are still many people commenting on it, because it's not easy just to pick it up and read it. It's really something that requires a lot of, what's it called, we debate. Debate is very helpful, but also a lot of background in understanding the terminology that he's using and trying to understand his arguments, what he's trying to say here. So as I said yesterday, there's different ways to approach that depending on your capacity and how much time you have. So yeah, it's almost 6 o'clock here. Does anyone have any questions? In Garfield's commentary, he said emptiness is the characteristic of conventional reality. Can you please expand on this? So I'm not exactly sure what he means, but my guess is he's saying that there's a difference between ultimate truth and ultimately true. The Tsongkhapa is something that he points out. He says that some people conflate these two. And it's not just a matter of words, it really means something different, which is that emptiness still exists conventionally. Emptiness is not truly existent. It is ultimate truth in the sense that when you search for the final nature of something, you find emptiness. But when you search for the final nature of emptiness, you also don't find it under that analysis. It also is seen to be contingent upon other things that are not itself. It is something that is dependent upon how we label it. And so it is conventionally real and not ultimately real, even though it is ultimate truth. It's two different things. So that's probably what he's saying, is that it is an aspect. This is how Tsongkhapa understands that it's any particular thing, it has its ultimate nature and its conventional nature. It's not that they exist as two different distinct things. We can point, there is emptiness. We might think that there's like the void. Sometimes early Tibetans had this idea that like you just destroy the world and the void is left. It's not like that. It's just the nature of things in and of themselves. You can't have one without the other. You have to have conventional reality in order for there to be anything that is empty. So it's a characteristic of conventional reality as opposed to something separate from it.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Venerable Gache. Thank you, everybody, to join us.
Okay, so I think, yeah, it sounds like there are no more questions. Is that right? That's fine. We can finish. It's good time. So thank you all for coming. So some of you might know, I've had the fortune to teach some of Nagarjuna's courses online, courses on Nagarjuna's text online. 4 of the 6 texts of the sixfold collection of reasoning that I mentioned yesterday. There is root wisdom and then grinding to dust. 60 stanzas on reasoning, 70 stanzas on emptiness, dispelling disputes, and precious garland. So I've had the fortune to be able to teach the middle 4 of those. So if you're interested, I think their recordings are available. One of them, the Guiding to Dust, I had done for Tushita just a few months ago. So someday I'd like to teach more about root wisdom and also precious garlands. So for root wisdom, I think that that'll have to wait for a while for a couple of reasons. One, it's just too long. Definitely couldn't do an online course unless it was going to take a few months or years. But also, I don't really feel qualified to teach it yet. We haven't studied it, as I mentioned. We studied Chandrakirti, and we of course, that's a lens for looking at Nagarjuna, but we don't actually debate the text directly. But when we do the Ladarmba class, eventually, not too far away now, then we will actually spend 1 month out of the year, every year, focusing on these texts. And so hopefully I'll feel more qualified, and it'll be better to teach it in person, I think, too, someday, just a feature. And then Precious Garland, I thought maybe if there's a possibility, that would be a little easier, because it's a lot more about conventional reality. Some of the verses are pretty easy, actually. It wouldn't even need any commentary. But nevertheless, it would be nice to do that sometime. So let's see. This is, I suppose, the end of the year for Tushita. It's almost the end of my visa also. I'll be leaving India soon. But, well, I've been in Nepal quite a bit, but I haven't been out of India and Nepal now for 5 years. So it'd be nice to have a little break. I hope to be back at the end of March, and then we'll see what happens next year. The schedule at Tushita and the schedule at Sarah and how they line up. But thank you all, and maybe see you again in the future. Okay.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you. Thank you, Venerable Gache.
Thank you for organizing this. Went very well.
Thank you so much. And I hope we can welcome you very, very soon next year, because we're starting our winter break today.
Yes, good.
Thank you so much.
We'll have to see what the
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Venerable Gache. Thank you so much.